Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Physique Decoded. I am your host, Richard. Today, we are lucky enough to have Chris Anstey as our guest. So welcome to the show, Chris.
Thanks, Richard. I'm looking forward to this chat.
Me too. So what we thought would be a really good idea to have you on the show today is to speak about coaching and leadership from a different perspective, perhaps outside of the personal training industry. But what's something that I've found is a lot of the, regardless of what sport you're playing or any type of coach that you are, a lot of the qualities will be quite similar across the board. So it's going to be really cool to get your perspective on coaching at junior to professional levels, as well as being an athlete, both on a junior and professional level. So we're super glad to have you on today. What I want to do is I want to get straight stuck into these questions because I know you're a busy man. First question that we wanted to throw at you today is, what in your mind separates a good athlete from a great athlete?
It's a great question to start with, and clearly the underlying elements of being skilled and conditioned, which I'm sure you've covered off and spoken about a lot. But we do see so many talented athletes that you wonder why they didn't make it, and maybe that's the question. And oftentimes, and I've been around some great athletes, and what I've landed on is that it's not just your ability to perform a skill; it's your ability to replicate a skill and to replicate a skill under duress. That becomes confidence, that becomes consistency. But some of the greatest athletes in the world, and I'll use an example of Steve Nash, who was a teammate of mine back in the Dallas Mavericks, and he certainly wasn't the most talented, biggest, strongest, or fastest, but what he could do was access his best ability more often than most people. Clearly, we have some outlying, incredible athletes, the LeBron Jameses of the world, who can just physically dominate. But even in the current, very currently, Steph Curry, physically is what you would describe as normal. He's just over 6 foot. He's not extraordinarily strong, but his ability to replicate a skill that very few athletes have managed to master is incredible. So I would say that it's that replication. It's the ability to put yourself on the training court for longer. And that's something I know that you don't need me to dig into, but that comes from the strength and conditioning element. But to put yourself on the court for longer, to get the volume of reps in and the volume of quality reps in. I love my sayings, and one of my favorites is, under pressure, you don't rise to the occasion, you revert to habit. So it's about creating really, really great training and work and life habits.
Okay, so these are things. Obviously, they're all going to be very trainable for athletes. What would be your advice to an athlete that's looking at trying to improve their ability to get from that level? So potentially, we have a few clients that are on the cusp of going to the professional level. What would be advice that you would give them?
It's always, I'm never one to give advice without knowing them. And I think it digs in, I think we'll touch on it later, is that it really takes getting to know an athlete and getting to know what they need individually and understanding them as a person before you do offer advice. But, generally speaking, I would say to make sure you surround yourself with the right people who have your genuine best interests at heart, that aren't doing it to benefit themselves. They're around you to benefit you. But I would always say invest in yourself, and continue to look long term. There are so many coaches out there who promise you so many things in the short term. There are coaches who place a priority on winning games on a Saturday at whatever level you play. And my examples, I just come back to, Brian Gorge, when he signed me at the Southeast Melbourne Magic, the investment he made me make into the food that I bought. To eat well costs more money than to eat badly. And I needed to, and he told me at the start, he said, every dollar you invest in eating well now, you're going to take $10, $20, $30 out later. And he was right. I wouldn't have got to the level of conditioning if I had been the fast food route and the soft drinks and all that kind of thing. But getting uncomfortable. So the last part was Gorge absolutely assured me that I was going to get worse before I got better. And my performance on the weekend wasn't going to be indicative of where I'd be in 12 months or 18 months' time, because he was going to put me through a volume and an intensity of training that my body wasn't used to, and it was going to suffer. It was going to fatigue, and it was almost going to break down. The strength and conditioning element was huge. The skill stuff, if I wasn't able to transfer it on the court due to not being fit enough or not being strong enough, it was wasted having that skill. So all three elements, there's an analogy of the three buckets that so many athletes fill the skill bucket till it's overflowing, and the strength bucket and the conditioning bucket sitting there empty. For me, it was about even pieces, investing in each of those three areas. And even as I went along, and what I didn't know at the time, I was also investing in my emotional intelligence because of the environment I was in. Some people will need to go away and find another bucket to invest in that space, because I think even more so today, the more we know, the more we're able to work on it. It's a huge area that athletes can get significant improvement in. How to reset when things aren't going well, how to deal with failure, how to deal with adversity. They're all great words when you write them on a wall, but when you add emotion or you get in the heat of a battle, no one's got any idea what they mean until you've drilled it. So that's a very, very long-winded answer. And to be honest, I can't even remember the question, but that going back to making sure you've grown habits that will stand you in good stead in your most important moments.
Yeah, absolutely. So just touching on that, just referring back to this in terms of strength and conditioning. Now, you've played obviously professionally in Australia, you played in Russia, you played in Spain, you've played in the US in the NBA. Was there much of a difference in terms of conditioning and strength and conditioning work that you would do at a professional level throughout the different leagues?
Yeah, there was. And the hardest I've ever worked, and I owe so much of my career to Bruce Gray. He was my strength and conditioning. He still is. He still trains my kids, and I still see him when I go into the gym. He set me a foundation that all other strength and conditioning work I did, wherever I went, was based on that foundation. But, he took me from 87 kilos through diet and strength in 2.5 years to get to 113 kilos with less body fat. Without that, I just couldn't have competed against some of the best. But, it was always, every single week, no matter what you missed out on, you needed to deadlift, you needed to squat, you needed to do legs, you needed to develop strength in your glute, you needed to be flexible. The upper body stuff was far less important for what I needed. The stuff that may make you look better on a beach was very oftentimes irrelevant to what we needed in a gym. But, it was all about functional strength and movement, understanding, again, how we could access our best ability and how it transferred to being on the basketball court. When we got to the NBA, I mean, strength and conditioning was such a smaller piece, because literally we had 3 games every week, and mid-season you just couldn't get that done. But it's always the off season. I always made sure that I tried to get off the court for as long as I could to get maximum benefit for being in the weight room for at least 6 or 8 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it is very different, isn't it, with the NBI? I'd heard Bryce Cotton speaking about this, with the differences in training levels in the NBA and in Australia and in Europe, whereas in Europe they train sort of 2 hours a day, and he said it sort of broke his body down a little bit, whereas
twice a day, 2 hours a day. Yep.
Whereas he said in the NBL you get to train a lot more because the games are predominantly on weekends only, but it wasn't quite as intense, whereas the NBA is a lot more about the preseason. And then, as you said, you're playing games every 3 to 4 days. So was it tougher on your body in the NBA? Was it tougher on your body in Europe, or?
It's tricky, but I would still come back and say that the toughest 3 years I ever had were with the Magic, but they're also the most beneficial and the most enjoyable.
Yeah.
But that's because my body hadn't done that before. And when you're breaking a habit or you're teaching yourself something new. It's hard.
Yeah.
And it genuinely took, there was a day, and as much as I trusted Bruce and as much as I trusted Gorge, I was really low. I'd been at the club for just under 18 months. I was still exhausted. My minutes had only increased a little bit from my rookie year at the Tigers. I was literally playing 7 or 8 minutes a game. And it had taken a long time. And as much as I loved it, I was starting to become a little bit skeptical. And there was this one week, and Gorge called me up he could tell. He was always great at knowing that something was going to happen almost before it did. He was great at predicting that. And he called me up in the office. I had this incredible training session. And he calls me up and he says, "How do you think training went today?" And I sort of smirked on, "Yeah, I was really good." I was flying up and down the floor. It seemed like it clicked. Everything, it was almost this one day to come together. And I was flying up and down the floor. I was battling with Gorge and Ronaldson and just played great. And he said, "Did anything change this week for you?" And I sort of thought about it and I went, "Yeah, we shortened our individuals. Brucey Gray had me doing sort of less reps at 80% of max, backed me right off in the weight room." And this was on a Thursday. In layman's terms, they sort of tapered me to give me some confidence to show that the path I was on was right. He said, and I said, "Yeah, they've rested me this week, so I guess I could get like that." He said, "Exactly." He said, "Do you trust me now?" And I sort of smiled and went, "I've always trusted." He said, "No, but do you see where you can get to now?" I said, "Yep." And he goes, well, he swore, but he goes, "Now get back to work." And they went straight back into the volume again. But it took a good 18 months to come out of that, where I felt like my body could handle that level of training and still be able to perform on game day. But I still reckon most young athletes and even parents, they're recovering from training sessions they don't need to recover from. They're doing everything they can to win every game on a Saturday, not knowing that it's detrimentally affecting their potential to be great in 2 or 3 years' time, because you've got to be able to play sore or fatigued and understand that winning an under 16 game or under an under 18 game in the big picture really doesn't matter.
Okay. So going on with Gorge here, because for those that don't know, Brian Goorjian is absolute royalty, a legend in Australian basketball and all over the world as a coach. Coached last season at the Illawarra Hawks. Now, coming into coaching, I'm going to ask the same sort of question, but I want to ask it from a coach, because obviously you coached Melbourne Tigers professionally for 2 years, as well as coaching junior athletes, coaching at Caulfield Grammar. I played at Carey, so we're kind of rivals a little bit. But
played you guys this week. Yep.
Oh, do you? There you go. So when we're talking about coaching, we spoke about as an athlete, what makes a good athlete, a great athlete. In your eyes, with your experience, because you would have coached under Don Nelson as well.
I played under Don Nelson.
Yeah,
so I've had a few state teams and various teams along the way. So I've been around, assisted with some Australian teams. So I've been around some high level players as well. Yep.
What is one of the traits or some of the traits that you see in high level coaches? So people that are that you would consider to be fantastic coaches in one way, shape, or another. Is there traits that you see?
Yeah, there are. I mean, the obvious one is work rate. Putting in the work and being prepared. And one thing I learned early in my coaching days, there are some nights you don't sleep well, and you realize the reason you're not sleeping was because you haven't covered everything off with the group, and you're not quite as prepared as or you don't feel like you've prepared the group quite as well as what they maybe needed to be. There are other games you go in and you've done the work, you sleep fine, knowing that you've given them everything they can possibly have. And now it's up to the players. You need to communicate well, but I think the biggest thing, or the two biggest ones for me, are to absolutely surround yourself with staff, and that's coaches, that's support staff who excel at areas you're not great at, and to not be threatened by their level of expertise. You need to provide your team with as much expert advice as you possibly can. And if my example is, I always coach with a point guard, because I can't see basketball through a point guard's eyes. I can read it in a book, I can tell you how to do it on video, but I never saw the game through a point guard's eyes. So I need a point guard on my coaching staff at all times. maybe even more importantly, is that you genuinely need to want to get to know the athlete, to get to know the person who is the athlete, and understand that one training methodology for one athlete, even in a team, doesn't necessarily have to be the same for every athlete on the team, and everyone will respond differently to different types of communication, to different types of training, and to be able to tailor and understand what each of your athletes need, and for you to earn their trust. Maybe even more so in coaching women and girls. There's a saying: nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. You have to demonstrate your care for your athletes genuinely, not to make it up, not to fabricate it, but you need to actually care for your athletes as people. And that's the one thing about Gorge and the best coaches I've had. They made me feel important, and they valued me as a person over an athlete. And because of that, as an athlete, I would do anything for them because it was them. Whereas maybe I wouldn't have done it for some other athletes early in my career because I had no idea what their intentions were. So those two, the expertise in the staff and genuinely caring for your athletes and genuinely wanting to provide them with an ability to reach their full potential is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. So building buy-in and building rapport with the athletes. Now, moving that across, obviously you coached both junior and professional level athletes. Do you find a difference in your own coaching style when you're like, what are some of the major similarities? I suppose what you just said there is a similarity, but is there any major differences that you have coaching Caulfield Grammar first?
Yeah. I mean, clearly the language, of course. You can hit on different things with your communication with adult athletes that you can't with juniors. Understanding, I think it also comes back to understanding the why. Why is a student there? Are they there because they have to play sport? Are they a participation type student, or are they a performance type student? If they want to access, a much higher level of ability, I'll coach them differently than the student who's there because they maybe want to lose a little bit of weight, or because they have to do a sport, or their why might be very different. And it's understanding the athlete's why. I still think it comes down to your care and formulating the right training plans for that group, spending time away from the court with the athletes and with the team, encouraging them to spend time with each other away from the court and away from the team as well. And I just think, it's hard to describe chemistry. It's hard to build it, but you can certainly put in place behaviours and expectations, from day one. And, Alistair Clarkson always used to say that what's the saying? If you walk past something and don't address it on day one, you've got to deal with it for the duration of your tenure. You've got to set standards early days. But if you do that, and if you're genuine with the team, I think you'll have heard a million professional athletes say it. You can go harder at a player if they know you're coming from a good place, but if you do it early when they're unsure, it might not be received as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We find that as well. And the one thing I just want to bring back as well that I think is a huge thing, even in our coaching industry, is what you said about surrounding yourself with other coaching staff that can make the athlete better. And I think that's a really good point to draw back on here, because you tend to see sometimes in our industry where it will be the coach sort of, whether it's an insecurity thing or whatnot, but a coach will try to take on everything themselves. So I think it's really important, and it's a really good point that you made there about making sure that you have the best of the best around, because it doesn't necessarily just make the athlete better, but it can also make you a better coach as well. So I thought that was a really good point to draw on there.
I think really inexperienced coaches try to prove that they can coach. Experienced coaches don't care if you think they can coach or not, but they know that they can genuinely help you.
Yeah.
The good coaches for me and the good leaders for me are the ones who make you feel better for being in the room with them. It's not about instructing. I've always believed coaching is a series of ideas. There's oftentimes not a black and white, right or wrong. In the strength and conditioning industry, certainly there are a lot of non-negotiables. But even within each individual client, I'm sure there are variables. It's not about giving or proving that you can coach because you know a drill or you know how to teach a lift. It's about the client, again, feeling important, making sure that they feel good when they turn up to the gym, and them looking forward to the hour. We've got a saying at Caulfield that we need to create an environment that our students want to turn up to, not have to turn up to. And I think that's a massive difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. 100% agree with that. Now, this next question is a little bit broad. So I want to, hopefully we can get some sort of context within this question. It is a little bit broad, but every coach, regardless of where they've coached, what industry they're in, will deal with conflict at some point. What would be your key, I guess, your key points that you would look at that you think would be good for conflict resolution?
Yeah, transparency, number one, and oftentimes a little bit like we've already mentioned, that the solution comes days, weeks, and months before you need to deal with it, because you have developed relationships with these people that you can have a genuine conversation with them. If you're the type of team where you walk in the room, hey, you going, man? Good, man. You, what's up? Nothing. What'd you do last night? Not much. If you're that team and you don't have real conversations, conflict resolution's hard because you don't really know each other. But if you're starting from a deeper level through your day to day, you've got a better chance of solving that. But you know what? The other thing I think, even in the lead up to conflict resolution as a leader, is to be vulnerable. And you don't need to be the best and be bulletproof. You need to be at some level vulnerable. If you're having a bad day, it's okay for your players to know. Looking back, some of the days with my under 18 girls that I coached, and my daughter was on that team, I didn't even realize it at the time, but I had some things go on personally away from basketball that I brought in the training. There was one night I couldn't coach. I literally sat there, my assistant coach took it, and I was close on tears just sitting there. And one by one, the girls would sort of come over to check on me, and I'm thinking that's not their role. And I'm like, I'm okay. And by the end of it, I'm like, look, I'm actually not. And I spoke to them about why. And I hadn't planned on doing it, but I'd like to think that my level of vulnerability, which wasn't intended, was something that actually helped me grow my relationships further with that group. That I didn't try to hide it. I didn't try to bullshit my way through it. It was just me on that day. And I think they appreciated that. So, even within that group, when it came to addressing conflict within that group, I think I came from a different place as to a coach who might have kept the group at arm's distance or didn't quite understand, the mechanics of what was going on in the group. But again, the closer you are with players, I think, and I mentioned Gorge, and it's the best I've ever seen at it, he was able to identify conflict when it was really, really small before it became big. And the earlier you catch it, the better chance you've got of addressing it. Yeah. And even, the self-deprecating, hey, I'm probably way off base here, but I've noticed this. And I go, oh, no. And you almost diffuse it before it happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, coming back to it, that whole key theme here of building buy-in and building rapport with the athletes to get them to believe in, whether it's a sport or it's an individual that you're working with, is getting them to buy in and trust you. And then that's when they're going to be able to perform at their best. So as a final sort of question here in regards to coaching, if you were to have somebody sit down and ask you 2 or 3 key points that will be the best thing to work on for long term to build themselves into the best coach possible. I know a lot of that's probably sort of we've gone through previously in the podcast, but is there any 3 key summary points that you would say to people to send them on the right track to
watch and learn, put yourself in coaching clinics, spend time around other teams, invest in your philosophy and be really clear in what that is. Invest in your players, get to know them, spend time away from your workplace with your players, get to know them, get to know their families, get to know their why. and be prepared, to do the work. It becomes really obvious when you haven't done the work. If you don't have an answer, that's okay. You can go, you need most answers. You need a level of skill, but if you don't have it, don't make it up. Tell them you don't know, go away and find an answer. I'll get back to you tomorrow with that, but good question. They would be my three.
Excellent. Perfect. Glad to hear that. Now, next question. We put up a Q&A box a couple of days ago on social media for anybody that wanted to ask you any questions. One of the most popular questions that we had come through was, what was one of your most wow moments in your professional career?
There are a lot, but it would have to be playing against Michael Jordan and then beating him. I only ever played the Chicago Bulls, and it was in that Last Dance year once. It's funny. I went through a range of emotions that game, and I've mentioned it already that you don't make good choices when you're emotional. And I'd gone from starting the month leading up, I didn't play a minute in the first half, and all I could do was look down the other end and then watch the game. And hey, that's Michael Jordan. And I went from being so excited to play against him to so disappointed that I didn't play a minute in the first half that my mind was all over the place at halftime. And back then, without social media and with limited news coverage, in my mind, I needed a photo in a game with Michael Jordan. So my tennis friends who I'd only played tennis 5 years earlier would believe me. I didn't feel they'd believe I played in a game of basketball against Michael Jordan. But I played the second half and I found my way into it. The irony was I was so wound up when I got on the court in the moment. I was terrible for the first few minutes. I shot two of the worst free throws you could ever imagine. Because I got so distracted with what was going on around me. You look around, it's Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Luke Longley, Dennis Rodman, Phil Jackson, Steve Kerr, Tony Kerr. The list just went on. And I remember standing on the free throw line thinking, they must be wondering, who the hell's that? And like I said, two of the worst free throws, and I was just looking at the bench waiting to be dragged. And in that moment, and it's far from rock bottom in any big scale thing, but that was my rock bottom in that game. I had this incredible opportunity, this once in a lifetime deal to play against Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls, and I'd blown it. So I literally remember thinking, well, if I'm only on here for another 30 seconds or a minute, I might as well enjoy it. Who cares now? And it's always interesting when I say who cares or I don't care anymore. It's that I don't care what other people think. I'm just going to do me now. And the minute I stopped caring about external expectations in that moment, I found my way into the rhythm of the game. Actually had a pretty good game. I didn't come out. I ended up playing the fourth quarter. I was on the court when we hit a basket to go into overtime. I played most of overtime and we won. And, I've retired never having lost a game of basketball to Michael Jordan, which is very cool. He's not calling me for a rematch. But there were so many lessons I learned in that game, and to have such close access to one of the greatest teams and players of all time. But again, the biggest one for me was forgetting the end result, and just, you hear it all the time about worrying about the process, but not caring about what anyone else outside of your very tight inner circle thinks. We get so wound up on outside opinion. And even if I was to go back to your question about the coach, don't try to prove you can coach. Just do it. Just do the best you can for the group you've got. Same as playing. Do the best you can without worrying about what others think, and you'll play with a lot more freedom.
Absolutely. Now you played 2 Olympics.
I did, yes. Missed one with injury, which was devastating.
And you had, I previously remember, and I have a snippet flashback in my brain from a dinner about 9 years ago in Perth.
Right.
Where you were calling the U.S. team by their numbers.
Yeah, we did.
I thought that was we've got a few. I told a couple of our basketball followers about that, and I told them that I would get you to tell that story.
This was in the lead up to the Beijing Olympic Games, and we played Team USA, and it was a year where it was Paddy Mills's first Australian major tournament, was Joe Ingles' first Australian major tournament. We had a very young team. Dave Barlow, Brad Newley were young. And, Yeah, we actually caught a couple. I've written about this. Paddy Mills, if you can imagine this now, it sounds crazy to think, but him and Joe were getting autographs from the American players in the lobby before shoot around. And, and Brian Gorge, and again, was the coach of this team. And, it was kind of like, God, these guys aren't quite where they need to be. And it was the only time I've ever said to Gorge, look, if this starts badly because we're a little bit starstruck, just throw me in and take me back out again. But so we were down 9 or 10 odd points, and we came in and they were shooting free throws. And, I went up to Dwight Howard and spun him around. I go, boys, I got number 10. And then, you spin around LeBron James, go, Barlow, you take 6. And then you start going through the whole team and you're calling them, and they're looking at you going, I know you know who I am. But the whole point being that we were so caught up, in my opinion, and it may be off base, in playing against the perception of Team USA and their reputations and what we know publicly about them, that we were focused on that more than we were focused on us. And I just wanted to put it back to a numerical, we've got number 9 on blue and I've got number 10 on blue, and let's just play. And we ended up having this really good game. We lost, but I think they only outscored us by 1 or 2 points the rest of the game. We lost by 10 odd points. But for me, that was how I've always enjoyed being naive in that circumstance. That, it's like the Bulls game. And it's like this Team USA, that it always really bothered me with the Australian team a generation ago, that we always considered ourselves underdogs. I didn't like it. I was naive enough to expect that we could beat anyone, because, as I mentioned, champions aren't necessarily the most talented, but they access their highest level more often. And my belief was, if we can score once against Team USA, it must be possible. And if we can stop them one time, it must be possible. So it's not impossible to do these two things, but what you need to be able to do is replicate it. And that becomes the challenge. But there's a great, I still love being naive. I still love taking a swing at things that many people think insurmountable. And if you fail, and again, that's another great thing with great athletes that I've noticed, you just got to be willing to fail, to put yourself in rooms where you're the worst person in the room, or the least educated, or on a court where you're the worst player, because that's the only way you grow. And, I learned so much from those types of games, that even when I came back and played at lower levels, in my mind, it was still like, how would I be if it was against Team USA? Yeah. And I had to step myself out of sort of reverting back to the level I was playing at a few times. But no, that was that story, and it might not have been as interesting as what you made it out to be, but we certainly had fun with it, and it's fun to remember.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think any story in regards to, playing at an Olympic level or playing at a national level, that is always going to be interesting, especially getting the mindset inside behind it as well. And then there was one more. This one's more personal for me. But I also had remember one story that you said at a dinner, which was about somebody and Kobe Bryant and his shoes.
That was LeBron. It was Mike Worthington at this same sort of time, and Wortho was talking a bit of trash, and same sort of thing, trying to stand up for the group and show, almost a little bit of a generation later than when Shane Heal sort of chest bumped Charles Barkley, to almost symbolically stand up to the group. And when Wortho was always like that, and LeBron looked at Wortho and said, and he used his name. He goes, Wortho, if you're going to talk shit, don't wear my shoes. And he looked down and he's wearing LeBron's. It was very funny. He hadn't considered that, I don't think, when he started talking. But no, there are all these interactions you have over the years, and a lot of them are funny. A lot of them don't mean much at the time. They become more important later. And, learning lessons in sport, and I think learning lessons in life, as you don't often learn the lesson at the moment it's delivered. You learn it days, weeks, months, or even years later. And it's one of the most fun parts about being retired, is reminiscing over moments and realizing maybe how they help form you or shape your opinion or belief. But no, sports certainly taught me a lot, both coaching and playing. And those are some of the moments that, as funny as they are, there's still a lesson tied in there.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think I can just speaking on my own coaching career now. So I've been coaching for 16 years, and I think I've always heard, the phrase that, experience becomes the best teacher. And I think it probably took me up until about 3 or 4 years ago, before I really sort of sat down and thought about that and realized, there's the way that I coach now is so much about learning mistakes that I'd previously made, either as an athlete or as a coach, and turning around and almost habitually fixing them now for people. So yeah, I 100% can relate to that on that level. Now, final point before we jump off here today. So everybody has watched The Last Dance. So
I know what question this is. Yeah, okay.
And I mean, you spoke on swinging on players, so I feel like we can have a great segue into this. For those that don't know, Chris was featured in the Last Dance, the Michael Jordan documentary. If you go back and watch I'd say the Dennis Rodman episode.
Yeah, I did. It isn't funny that I had so many calls after this. When you said it's very, very generous of you to say featured, and I think it probably got about 3 seconds in there. But when I threw that elbow at Rodman and sort of stopped a millimeter from his face, and that was in that game we beat him.
Yeah,
and a little bit the same. It was. I'd made a couple of baskets. I'd had a dunk, and that was actually in overtime. And it was this one contested rebound, which was rare for a couple of reasons. A, that Steve Kerr missed an open three. And it was probably the one contested rebound I had in my entire game against Dennis Rodman. He had 20 odd, I had maybe 4 or 5. But this one was important, and it sort of tipped around and ended. And it's funny, like you said, you revert to habit, right? And I was always taught, and I hadn't played the game that long, when you get it protected by chinning it, get your elbows up. And I did that. And I knew Rodman was around because he was my direct opponent. And he sort of hit me on the waist and kind of trying to G me up. And I turned and I saw him, and I just stopped and I laughed in his face. And I'd like to think the reason I laughed was, do you think I'm stupid enough to hit you right now, knowing that we're up 4 with a minute and a half to go? Get it. Unsportsmanlike, they get 2 shots, they had possession. Imagine losing to the Bulls based on something dumb like that. Turns out we both got technicals. They cancelled each other out. I went and turned the ball over the next possession and gave them a bit of a snip, but we won. Look, there wasn't that much in it, but again, for me, it was a little bit the same, like Shane Heal, like Werther. It's just standing up to someone. And the funny part was, I never even considered at the time, but that was a photo that they used in the local media the next day about, the underdog Mavs standing up to the Chicago Bulls. That was one that they used, and there was a little bit of positive publicity attached. But for me, it was, whether it was Rodman or whether it was someone I'd never heard of, I don't think it really would have made a difference. And it's funny, the moments that you don't even consider in real time that become, I got a T-shirt of it, that people send me a T-shirt with this cartoon image of me with my elbow up around Rodman's throat. But that's fun. My kids find it humorous. My kids have the T-shirt. I've got one, but I feel like an idiot wearing it, so I only ever wear it at winter underneath other layers of clothes. But no, look, there've been some fun times, and there've been some incredible people along the journey. And one thing I will say, and I think it fits in, I know you didn't ask me a question, but coming out of lockdown, there's a very brief story. It's a longer story, but my daughter had an opportunity one time. I invited her out. Her role model is Dirk Nowitzki, who's an old teammate of mine. And we've been on tour and traveling around visiting colleges for her, and she was exhausted. And I sort of said to her, look, we're getting into Texas. I said, look, when we get in, I'd love to take you to Dallas to sort of show you where I lived, where Mum and I spent time, maybe introduce you to a few friends. And I asked her 4 or 5 times over the 3 or 4 hours leading up, again, on the flight. She said, no, I'm not interested. I'm going to my room. I'm going to watch, message my friends, watch Netflix, get room service. I couldn't convince her. So she'd essentially said no. I said, look, I got to a stage where I said, look, it'd really mean a lot to me as your dad if you could come in. And by the time she's getting sick of, Dad, I'm going to my room, room service and message my friends. And I said, that's a real shame because Dirk was looking forward to meeting you. And she kind of, what? I said, yeah, we're going to Dirk's house for dinner. And you'd never seen someone change their mind that quickly, up and down stairs. And we went, she had what she would still describe as one of the best nights of her life. Not only did she meet Dirk, but got to chat to him for hours. They talked basketball, they talked life. She got to meet her role model or her idol, and he was even better than what she could have expected. But what I say to people, especially coming out of COVID, is that she said no to the best day of her life 5 times before I told her what was happening. It's so easy right now to say no to things that you think might not be great. It's so easy to sit on the couch because we've been accustomed to just turning the TV on and doing nothing, or sitting on social media for the last 2 years. It's really, really important that people find people like you, get into a weight room, get into a team sport, get out and be active, get out and do things and live life again, because there are so many incredible experiences out there that don't happen sitting on the couch in front of a screen at home. And they're not all going to be good. Some of them are going to be horrible, but I just think we all need to start putting ourselves out there, regardless of what we think might happen. Some of the experiences I've just described that happened in my life, I had no idea could have ever possibly happened. They certainly wouldn't have happened if I didn't get up off the couch. So for me, that's one that my daughter, I think, still carries with her to this day and says yes to a lot more things. And it's one that I'll always try to encourage, not just young listeners, but everyone to break that habit and get out and, like you said, invest in themselves, because it's very easy to say no to things right now.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And I think just adding on to that, I think if you speak to anybody that, regardless of level that they've played sport or done activity, whatever it is, I think, every single person has many, many fond memories, looking back, whether they realize it or not at the time, on, connecting with people in a sporting environment, or, pushing themselves to be better in any way, shape, or form. So I think that's a really, really important point. I think that's a fantastic point for people to take away and finish on. So again, Chris, I want to thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it so much. I know you're a busy guy. I know all coaches and athletes alike will get a lot out of this today. So I just want to.
You're welcome, mate. As I've always said, anything for the Collins family, mate. You guys are wonderful. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much, Chris. Have a great day.